3:47 in the morning. The number glowed on the medical monitor beside the hospital-grade bed, cold and accusatory in the darkness of Ravenscroft Manor's medical wing. That pale blue display was the only light making everything look dead. $847,000. That was the price tag on the equipment surrounding the bed. German hydraulic lift system, Swedish therapeutic mattress, American nerve stimulation machinery imported from Johns Hopkins. The finest medical technology money could buy in the year of our Lord 2024. All of it useless. 15 specialists had examined the boy over 23 months. Neurologists from London, orthopedic surgeons from New York Presbyterian, a pediatric rehabilitation team from Mayo Clinic who'd flown in on a private jet and stayed for 6 days running tests that cost more than most Americans earned in a year. Their conclusion delivered in the somber tones of men accustomed to breaking hearts: the child would never walk again. The spinal damage was too severe, the nerve pathways too compromised. The window for recovery, narrow under the best circumstances, had closed. The boy was 3 years old, and he was sentenced to a wheelchair for whatever remained of his fragile mortal life. In the grand foyer of Ravenscroft Manor, a leather briefcase fell from porcelain-white hands. It struck the imported Italian marble with a sound like a gunshot. Lord Lucien Ravenscroft, 780 years old, veteran of Agincourt, survivor of the Black Death, undisputed master of this Gothic fortress, did not hear it fall. His eyes, the color of tarnished silver, were frozen on the scene unfolding through the floor-to-ceiling windows. His son was standing, not braced by $800,000 of machinery, not suspended in the harnesses prescribed by those 15 specialists, not supported by the chrome walker gathering dust in the corner of his room. Edmund Ravenscroft stood alone on the emerald grass of the manor's east garden, his small orthopedic shoes sinking slightly into earth still damp from morning dew. He swayed like a candle flame in wind, trembling with the monumental effort of defying gravity and medical opinion. 6 feet away, kneeling on the wet ground in a simple blue housekeeping uniform, was the woman who had arrived at the manor barely 3 weeks ago. Margot Brennan wore bright yellow rubber gloves that clashed violently with the somber elegance of the estate. She did not look at the boy with pity, not the suffocating, soul-crushing pity Lucien had seen in every doctor's eyes, every nurse's careful expression, every well-meaning visitor's tragic glance. She smiled. It was radiant, defiant, a smile that suggested she knew something the world did not. Her gloved hands clapped together in a soft, rhythmic beat. The yellow caught the early morning light, making them look like twin beacons in the gray dawn. "Come on, my brave knight," she called, her voice carrying warmth that seemed to defy the October chill. "You're stronger than any curse, stronger than any broken bone. Come to these hands." Lucien felt his lungs turn to ice. Terror, a human emotion he thought he'd outgrown somewhere around the 15th century, surged through his immortal veins. The doctors had been explicit. Edmund's spine was as fragile as parchment. A fall could be catastrophic. Paralysis could become quadriplegia, or worse. This mortal woman, this cleaning girl who'd been in his employ for less than a month, was gambling with the life of his only heir, the last living piece of the woman he'd loved, the single thread connecting him to something that felt like mortality, like purpose, like a reason to continue through the endless gray march of centuries. No. The word tore from Lucien's throat like a death rattle. He lunged toward the garden doors, throwing them open with such violence that the antique frames groaned under supernatural strength. The crash of glass against stone should have shattered the moment, but in the garden the miracle continued. Edmund heard his father's roar. The boy's dark eyes, Ravenscroft eyes, ancient eyes, flickered toward the house for just a moment. Then he looked back at those glowing yellow hands, and he laughed. It was a sound Lucien had not heard in 2 years. Not since the night of twisted metal and broken glass, the night of screaming tires and his wife's last breath, the night that had ended with him cradling his unconscious son in the rain while emergency lights painted the world in shades of catastrophe. Edmund laughed high and clear and pure as church bells. And then he lifted one small foot, placed it forward, shifted his weight, lifted the other foot. 4 steps. 4 impossible steps. Lucien stopped dead on the garden path. His heart, which typically beat with the slow, steady rhythm of something that had forgotten how to die, hammering against his ribs like a prisoner demanding release. Time seemed to liquefy, to slow, to become something he could observe from outside his own body. He watched his son's legs tremble with titanic effort. He saw the beads of sweat forming on the boy's forehead despite the cool air. He witnessed the absolute burning determination in those 3-year-old eyes, the same fire he'd recognized in soldiers who refused to accept defeat, even as death claimed them. Edmund's balance flickered. His small body tilted dangerously toward the stone fountain at the garden's edge, an antique piece brought from Versailles, beautiful and utterly unforgiving. "I have you," Margot's cry split the morning air. She sprang forward with reflexes that were almost feline, her movements precise and practiced. Her hands caught Edmund mid-tumble before gravity could complete its claim. She pulled him into a protective embrace and rolled, cushioning his small body with her own as they tumbled across the grass. Edmund, instead of crying, instead of screaming in pain or fear, erupted into peals of delighted laughter. He wrapped his tiny arms around Margot's neck with surprising strength, giggling like this was the finest game he'd ever played. Lucien reached them 3 seconds later, his breath coming in ragged gasps that he didn't need but his body remembered. His face was a mask of pale fury and lingering terror. He tore Edmund from Margot's arms with a sharp movement, his hands running over the boy's small body, checking for injuries, feeling for broken bones, searching for any sign that this woman's recklessness had cost him everything that mattered. "What on God's green earth do you think you're doing?" His voice came out as thunder, resonating with a power that made the very trees shiver. The ancient authority of a vampire lord who had commanded armies, who had toppled kingdoms, who had made world leaders hesitate with nothing but the weight of his shadow. "You could have killed him. I explicitly told you he is never to leave that chair. He's a disabled child, for heaven's sake." Margot stood up quickly, smoothing her white apron over her blue dress, with hands that Lucien noticed with some surprise did not tremble. She did not lower her gaze, did not cower before him, did not show the fear that usually flickered across mortal faces when confronted with his full presence. Her honey-colored eyes sparked with an intensity that left Lucien momentarily disoriented. "No, Mr. Ravenscroft." Her voice was firm but respectful, the tone of someone who understood hierarchy but refused to be crushed by it. "He is not disabled. He's a child who simply needed to believe he could walk, and he just took 4 steps. You saw it with your own eyes." Lucien's jaw tightened until his teeth ached with the pressure. He pressed Edmund against his chest, feeling the boy's heartbeat so fast, so alive, so terrifyingly fragile. "I saw a reckless act of insubordination that almost cost him his spine." He looked down. Edmund was squirming not in pain but in protest, his small hands reaching back toward Margot like a flower turning toward sunlight. Lucien made his decision, the only decision that made sense in this moment of fear and fury and confusion. "You're fired, Miss Brennan. Leave this house before I call the authorities for criminal negligence." Margot took a step back. The light in her eyes dimmed, replaced by something that looked like disappointment, not in him, which would have been understandable, but for him, which was infinitely worse. But before she could utter a word of defense, before Lucien could turn away and end this disastrous experiment, a small, pale hand tugged at the silk lapel of his coat. "Da." The syllable was barely a whisper. Lucien froze. Every muscle in his 780-year-old body locked into absolute stillness. Edmund never spoke. The boy's development had stalled after the accident, frozen in time alongside his legs. The specialists had theories: trauma, neurological damage, selective mutism. But for 14 months, Edmund Ravenscroft had not uttered a single word. Until now. Lucien looked down at his son. Those dark eyes, so like his mother's, stared up at him with crystal clarity. Edmund pointed a trembling finger toward Margot. "Daddy." The The word was clearer this time, still quiet, still uncertain, but unmistakably real. "Look!" The boy wriggled in his father's iron grip, fighting to be put down with a determination that was startling in its intensity. Stunned, moving as if in a dream, Lucien lowered his son slowly. His hands hovered, terrified, certain the boy would collapse like a marionette with cut strings. But Edmund planted his feet firmly on the grass. He gripped his father's trousers with one hand for balance, small fingers twisting into the expensive fabric. With the other hand he pointed at Margot. "I walked." The words were barely breath, but to Lucien they sounded louder than the cannons at Agincourt, louder than the bells that had rung out the Black Death's end, louder than anything he'd heard in nearly 8 centuries of existence. "Daddy, I walked." His 3-year-old son, written off by the best medical science in the world, sentenced to a life of limitation and dependence, had just spoken his first words in over a year. And those words were about hope. Lucien looked up at Margot Brennan. In the fading morning light, with her messy bun coming loose and her cleaning uniform wrinkled from rolling in the grass, she no longer looked like a mere servant. She appeared in that moment to be the only person in the entire world who understood the magnitude of what had just transpired. The only one who had believed when everyone else, including him, had given up. "How?" His voice broke. 780 years of aristocratic composure, of vampire authority, of carefully maintained distance from mortal emotion, all of it crumbled in that single syllable. The doctors said his nerves were dead. Margot knelt slowly, bringing herself to Edmund's eye level. The boy released his father's trousers and took one wobbling step toward her before Lucien caught him, held him upright. "Nerves need orders, sir," she replied softly, peeling off one glove with careful deliberation. "And fear is a terrible commander. I simply gave him a reason to try, a reason to believe that trying mattered." Lucien opened his mouth to respond, to apologize perhaps, or to beg her to stay, or to demand she explain this impossible thing in terms his ancient mind could process. But the sharp click of high heels against stone shattered the fragile magic of the moment. The shadow in the house. "Lucien, what on earth is going on out here?" The voice sliced through the morning air like a blade through silk. Beatrice Thornhill descended the garden steps with the measured grace of someone who had perfected the art of making an entrance. At 48 she maintained the kind of severe beauty that intimidated more than it attracted: sharp cheekbones, ice blue eyes, blonde hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to lift her features. She wore a designer dress that cost more than Margot's annual salary. Silk, the color of winter cream, accessorized with pearls that had once belonged to a Russian princess. "I saw everything from the balcony," Beatrice continued, her voice rising with theatrical outrage. "That girl threw the child to the ground. I watched her do it. Call security this instant." The atmosphere shifted like a weather change. The delicate connection forming between father-son and governess evaporated under the heat of Beatrice's venom. She reached Edmund, placing a possessive hand on the boy's shoulder. Edmund recoiled from her touch, pressing closer to his father's legs. "My poor angel," Beatrice cooed, looking at Edmund as if he were a broken toy rather than a child. "Lucien, are you blind? This woman, this servant, was forcing him to walk. I saw her dragging him across the grass. It's obvious what she's doing. She wants to injure him so she can sue us for a fortune. It's what people of her kind do." Margot felt heat rise to her cheeks. She squeezed her gloves in her hand until her knuckles turned white. "Mrs. Thornhill, that is a lie." She stepped forward, her voice clear and devoid of the tremor that fear might have produced. Devoid of the submission that Beatrice clearly expected. "Edmund walked because he wanted to. Because we've been practicing every single day when you weren't looking. Every morning at dawn, every afternoon when you're in town. He's been getting stronger, and today he was ready." Lucien's head snapped toward her. The gratitude that had been building in his expression fractured, replaced by something darker. "Every day." His tone had cooled by several degrees. "You've been doing this behind my back, without medical supervision, without authorization. It's more than unauthorized, Lucien." Beatrice seized the opening like a predator scenting blood. "It's criminal. She's been playing doctor with your son. She could have paralyzed him for life. You must dismiss her immediately and ensure she never finds work in any decent household in New England again." Lucien looked at Margot. The momentary gratitude he'd felt was being devoured by the ancient fear of a father who had already lost too much. Beatrice's logic, though cruel, appealed to his protective instincts, and Beatrice knew it. She'd known Lucien for 150 years. She knew exactly which strings to pull. "Miss Brennan." Lucien's jaw hardened as he reverted to the cold, distant lord of the manor, the vampire king who had survived centuries by never letting emotion cloud judgment. "My sister-in-law is correct on one point. You had no authorization to perform therapy on my son. What you did was grave insubordination. You risked the most valuable thing in my life." Edmund, sensing the mounting tension through the emotional currents that children navigate better than adults, began to cry. Not a cry of pain, but of pure anguish. He stretched his small arms toward Margot, sobbing in a way that broke something in the morning air. Nana, stay. You see," Beatrice hissed into Lucien's ear, her voice low enough that only vampire hearing could catch it. "The child is trauma-bonded. He wants her because she manipulates him. Children cling to those who give them candy, not those who give them discipline. She's been bribing him, Lucien, grooming him for some scheme." Margot ignored Beatrice completely. She looked directly into Lucien's eyes, and when she spoke, her voice carried the weight of absolute conviction. "Mr. Ravenscroft, you can fire me. You can throw me into the street without a reference. You can ensure I never work again in this state or any other. But before you do, ask yourself one thing." She paused, letting the question hang in the air. "Why has the most valuable thing in your life progressed more in 3 weeks with me than in 2 years with doctors who treated him like a piece of broken furniture?" The silence that followed was heavy laden with the scent of damp earth and old secrets and truths that nobody wanted to speak aloud. Lucien looked at his son, who continued to wail, reaching for the young woman in the blue uniform. He looked at Edmund's legs, which still trembled with the residual energy of recent effort muscles that had been declared dead, now clearly alive. He looked at Beatrice, whose face was carefully arranged in an expression of concerned sympathy that didn't quite reach her eyes. And he looked at Margot, who stood with her chin raised, those bright gloves still clutched in her hand like a badge of honor. "Go to your room," Lucien finally ordered, his voice raspy and low. "Do not go near the boy until I decide your fate. I'm calling Dr. Bennett. If he finds a single scratch, a single new lesion on Edmund's back, I will not just fire you, Miss Brennan. I will ensure you spend the next 10 years in a prison cell." Margot nodded slowly. A single tear rolled down her cheek, but she wiped it away with the back of her hand in a gesture that was more angry than sad. She knelt slightly to be at eye level with Edmund, though she kept her distance as instructed. "I'm here, my brave knight," she whispered. "Never stop trying. Never." She turned and walked toward the service entrance with the dignity of someone who knew her own worth, even if the world refused to recognize it. Beatrice smiled, a small, triumphant curve of her lips that vanished almost as quickly as it appeared. "You did the right thing, dear," she said, placing a hand on Lucien's shoulder. "Tomorrow morning I'll bring in a certified nurse. A serious woman, not some frustrated do-gooder. I'll take care of everything." But Lucien wasn't listening to her. He was watching his son, who had stopped crying and was now leaning against his father's legs, trying to take a step in the direction Margot had gone. Edmund fell to his knees on the grass and pounded the ground in frustration, screaming one word over and over. "Nana! Nana! Nana!" The weight of centuries. That night, Ravenscroft Manor felt larger and colder than it had in a century. Lucien sat in his mahogany-lined study, a double glass of aged whiskey untouched on the desk before him. He didn't need alcohol. His vampire physiology processed it too quickly to feel effects, but the ritual of pouring it the amber liquid in crystal connected him to something human. The preliminary medical report sat beside the whiskey. Dr. Bennett had come on an emergency call, arriving within the hour with portable X-ray equipment and a grave expression. He'd spent 90 minutes examining Edmund with the thoroughness of a man who understood that careers could end based on what he found. Lucienne was terrified to read the conclusion. What if Beatrice was right? What if Margot's methods, however well-intentioned, had caused permanent damage? What if the effort of those 4 steps had compressed vertebrae, herniated discs, severed the delicate nerve pathways that still offered some small hope of future recovery? He picked up the report with a hand that trembled, something that hadn't happened since the Battle of Agincourt, when he'd been newly turned and still learning what it meant to be immortal. His eyes scanned the technical jargon. Lumbar vertebrae, L1 to L5, thoracic assessment, nerve conduction studies, pages of numbers and medical terminology that meant nothing until he reached the final section. Physician's notes. Whatever therapeutic protocol is currently being implemented, do not discontinue. This is the first time in 23 months of treatment that I have observed measurable positive evolution in this case. Patient exhibits signs consistent with neurological recovery that current medical literature suggests should not be possible given the severity of initial injury. Recommend continuation of current therapy under careful observation. Dr. Marcus Bennett, M.D. Pediatric Neurology. Lucian let the paper fall from his fingers. The whiskey remained untouched. "Do not stop," he whispered to the empty room. Whatever Margot Brennan was doing, it was working. Not in the way of $800,000 of German machinery, not in the way of 15 specialists with prestigious degrees, but working nonetheless. He stood up abruptly, the chair scraping against hardwood. He had to speak to her, had to understand, had to, God help him, apologize. Lucien moved through the manor's corridors with supernatural speed, his feet barely touching the floor. The service wing was in the east section of the house, an area he rarely visited, the domain of cooks and housekeepers, of people who maintained his life while remaining carefully invisible. He found Margot's room easily, her name on a small card beside the door. The door was slightly ajar, a sliver of light visible. He was about to knock when he heard Beatrice's voice inside. Lucien stopped, pressing himself into the shadows of the hallway. 7 centuries of survival had taught him the value of information gathered in secret. He thought of the security system Marcus had installed 3 years ago, a redundant backup that uploaded to cloud servers Beatrice didn't control. Lucien had approved the expense and promptly forgotten about it, but now he made a mental note to review those recordings tomorrow. "Listen to me, you starving peasant." Beatrice's voice was a poisonous whisper, stripped of all the cultured grace she displayed in public. "I don't care if the boy walks, flies, or performs magic tricks. That child is my ticket to administering the family trust. If he recovers fully, Lucien will stop depending on my guidance. If he's cured, I lose my leverage over the estate finances, so you will leave tomorrow one way or another." Through the crack in the door, Lucien could see Margot sitting on her narrow bed, clutching an old photograph to her chest. Even from this distance he could make out 2 figures in the image, Margot and a young girl, both smiling. "I will not leave, ma'am." Margot's voice trembled but held firm. "Because that boy needs me. And Mr. Ravenscroft is a good man. He's just blinded by his grief. He'll realize eventually who you truly are." Beatrice let out a laugh like breaking glass. "Lucien believes what I tell him to believe. I've been doing it for 150 years, girl. Ever since his brother chose that insipid American woman over me. And tomorrow, when he finds evidence that you've been stealing from the household accounts, he'll throw you out himself. Enjoy your last night under an expensive roof, Cinderella." The sound of Beatrice's heels clicking away echoed down the hall. Lucien remained in the shadows, his mind racing with the velocity of revelation. 150 years. He knew that timeline, knew it like he knew the scars on his own immortal body. That was when his brother Alaric had announced his engagement. When Beatrice Thornhill, young, beautiful, and already circling the family like a shark, had been rejected in favor of an American heiress. When Alaric had died 6 months later in a carriage accident. An accident that had never quite made sense. Alaric was an expert horseman. The carriage had been new, the road clear, the weather fair. But the axle had snapped, sending the carriage tumbling down a ravine. Beatrice had been the first to arrive at the scene. Beatrice had been the one to comfort young Lucian in his grief. Beatrice had been the one to suggest she stay on to help manage the estate, to be the family that Lucian had lost for 150 years. And now Edmund Lucian's son, his heir, the last of the Ravenscroft line, was the only thing standing between Beatrice and complete control of a fortune valued at $340 million. Lucian's hands clenched into fists. He had been played. For more than a century, he had been an instrument in someone else's scheme. And Margot Brennan, this 26-year-old woman with her $2 gloves and her impossible optimism, was the only one who had seen through it. The morning after. Dawn came too quickly, and not quickly enough. Lucian had not slept. He'd spent the night making plans, reviewing options, preparing. He found Margot in the kitchen at dawn. She stood at the industrial stove, stirring a small copper pot with methodical precision. The aroma wasn't coffee or breakfast, it was something pungent and earthy, eucalyptus rosemary, and something else he couldn't quite identify. Margot didn't jump when she sensed his presence. She simply lowered the flame and turned slowly. "It smells like witchcraft," Lucien said, his voice gravelly from disuse. "It smells like the countryside, sir." She met his gaze without flinching. "It's a liniment for joints. My grandmother used it on horses when they injured their legs. Then she used it on the elderly in our village when their bodies started to fail them." Lucien stepped closer, examining the greenish liquid. "My son is not a horse, Miss Brennan, nor an elderly villager." "No, sir, but muscles are muscles and pain is pain." She lifted the pot slightly, letting steam rise between them. "The doctors give him pills to numb the nerves. This wakes them up. The heat of the rosemary activates blood flow. The massage reminds the legs that they exist, that they're still part of his body, that they still have a job to do." Lucien remembered the report. Nerve response improved by 40%. Science was backing what this woman knew from folk wisdom and grandmother's recipes. "Dr. Bennett said Edmund is improving," Lucien admitted. Margot's eyes lit up. A genuine smile broke across her face, the first real joy he'd seen from her since the garden incident. "Truly." She brought her hands to her chest. "I knew it. I felt his little legs pushing back yesterday during the exercises. I knew I wasn't crazy." Her reaction was so pure, so free of calculation or self-interest, that it disarmed him completely. Lucien poured himself a glass of water, turning his back to hide the emotion threatening to surface. "You have 1 week," he said. "I'll allow you to continue your methods, but on one condition, no going into the garden without me present. And if Edmund cries out in pain even once it's over—" "He won't cry from pain, sir." Margot's voice was soft but certain. "He'll cry from effort, like a champion does." At that moment the sharp staccato of heels echoed in the hallway. Beatrice marched into the kitchen looking impeccable in a cream silk dress, her hair perfectly coiffed despite the early hour. She stopped dead when she saw Lucien and Margot standing close together, talking in tones that suggested intimacy rather than employer and staff. "Lucien, darling." Beatrice's smile was tight. "I thought this woman would have her bags packed by now. I've already contacted the nursing agency. They have a German specialist available. Shall I confirm the booking?" "Cancel it," Lucien interrupted without looking at her. Beatrice blinked. "Excuse me. Miss Brennan stays." Lucien's voice rang with an authority that made even Beatrice take a step back. "Dr. Bennett's report is positive. Whatever she's doing is working. Edmund stays with her." For just a fraction of a second, Beatrice's mask slipped. Pure, unadulterated hatred flickered across her features, a rage so deep and old that it seemed to age her 20 years in the space of a heartbeat. Margot saw it, but Lucien, already turning toward the exit, missed it entirely. "But Lucien, it's dangerous," Beatrice argued, her voice rising in pitch. "The liability alone—" "It is my decision, Beatrice." He left the kitchen, his footsteps echoing with finality. Beatrice stood frozen, breathing heavily. Slowly she turned toward Margot. The housemaid had returned to her pot of liniment, stirring with steady hands, but her shoulders were tense. Beatrice approached until she was close enough that Margot could smell her perfume, expensive, cloying, too sweet to be natural. "Enjoy your little victory, Miss Brennan," Beatrice hissed. "But understand something. When a person climbs too high without the proper equipment, the fall is always fatal. And in this house, accidents happen with remarkable frequency." Margot gripped the wooden spoon tighter but didn't turn around. "I'm not afraid of accidents, ma'am. I'm afraid of wicked people, and I believe that light always finds a way to expose darkness." Beatrice's laugh was dry and humorless. "Light doesn't penetrate this manor, dear girl. Only gold enters here, and you have nothing." She swept out of the kitchen, her heels hammering a silent threat into the floor with each step. Margot remained alone, watching the greenish liquid simmer. She had bought herself time, but she'd also painted a target on her back in bold, unmistakable colors. Edmund was improving. That was the only thing that mattered. She would protect him not just from the paralysis of his legs, but from the woman who claimed to be family. The battle for the Ravenscroft heir had moved from the garden into the shadows of the estate itself. And Margot Brennan, armed with nothing but determination and grandmother's wisdom, was going to war. Week 1. Edmund took 10 steps across the library floor before his legs gave out. Margot caught him, lowered him gently to the Persian rug, and began the massage routine that had become their ritual. Her hands, always gloved in those distinctive yellow pair that had become Edmund's beacon of hope, worked the muscles of his calves with practiced precision. Rosemary oil and eucalyptus warmed between her palms, sank into skin that had forgotten what strength felt like. "Count with me, brave knight," she whispered. 1, 2, 3. Edmund's voice joined hers, thin but determined. His pronunciation was still uncertain words tumbling over themselves, but he was speaking. Every day more words, more sentences, more of the boy he'd been before the accident tried to erase him. Lucien watched from the doorway, hidden in shadow. He'd taken to observing these sessions without announcing his presence, watching his son transform under the care of a woman who had walked into their lives with nothing but conviction and $2 gloves. Cost of therapy equipment gathering dust in the medical wing, $847,000. Cost of Margot's supplies for week 1, $43. Epsom salts, essential oils, rubber gloves, a book of children's songs from the village library. The mathematics didn't make sense, but the results were undeniable. Week 4. 50 steps, Margot announced, her voice bright with triumph. 50 steps without stopping Edmund. Do you know what that means? The boy beamed at her, his dark Ravenscroft eyes shining with pride. He stood in the center of the ballroom, a space that hadn't been used in decades, now repurposed as a training ground. "It means I'm getting stronger," Edmund said carefully, sounding out each syllable. "Like the knights in the stories." "Exactly like the knights. And tomorrow we'll try for 60. Lucien reviewed the medical reports that Dr. Bennett delivered weekly. The improvement was measurable now. Muscle mass increased by 28%, nerve conductivity up by 45%, range of motion expanding daily. But it was the financial report on his desk that told another story. Cost of Margot's therapy through week 4, $240. Cost of the specialized care Beatrice had been pushing him to authorize, $17,000 per week. The difference was staggering and telling. Week 8. Edmund ran. Not far, not fast. Just from one end of the garden path to the fountain, a distance of perhaps 200 meters. His gait was unsteady, his arms windmilling for balance, but he moved under his own power. Margot ran beside him, hands hovering ready to catch him if he fell, but she didn't touch him, didn't support him, let him own this victory completely. When Edmund reached the fountain, he collapsed onto the stone bench, gasping and laughing in equal measure. "I ran, Nana, like a real boy." Margot knelt beside him, checking his pulse, examining his pupils, assessing his breathing with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done this professionally. "You are a real boy, my dear heart. The realest boy I've ever known." From the balcony above, Lucian felt something in his chest that he hadn't experienced in 2 years. Something that felt dangerously close to hope. But from a different window, Beatrice Thornhill watched with calculations running behind her ice-blue eyes. The arithmetic of greed. The Ravenscroft estate was valued at $340 million. Lucien controlled 67% through Edmund's inheritance. $170 million held in trust until the boy reached 18, managed until that day by his father. Beatrice controlled 33%, $112 million. But control was not the same as ownership. The trust documents drafted 140 years ago, when Lucien's brother Alaric still lived, contained a clause that Beatrice had studied like scripture. In the event that the primary heir is deemed incapable of managing affairs due to physical or mental incapacity, management of said heir's portion shall default to the appointed guardian's discretion until such time as capability is restored. For 2 years, Edmund's condition had kept that clause active. Beatrice made every financial decision regarding the boy's portion of the estate: investments, acquisitions, expenditures. She'd been careful, skimming off the top in ways that looked legitimate on paper. Consulting fees, administrative costs, management expenses. Over 2 years, she'd siphoned off approximately $4 million that no one would ever find in the complex web of estate finances. But if Edmund recovered fully, that clause became void. Lucien would resume complete control. He would audit. He would find the discrepancies. And Beatrice would lose everything, not just the money she'd stolen, but the position, the power, the proximity to wealth that had defined her existence for 150 years. She stood in her private study reviewing the numbers on her laptop screen. $4 million was comfortable, but it wasn't enough to maintain her lifestyle. Not for an immortal with expensive tastes and no legitimate income. She needed Edmund dependent, needed him limited, needed that trust clause to remain forever active. The boy walking was a problem. The boy running was a crisis. Margot Brennan had to be eliminated, and it had to be done in a way that destroyed her credibility so thoroughly that Lucien would never question her dismissal. Beatrice pulled out her phone and made a call. "Yes, I need to order something. Benzodiazepine, high potency, adult dosage. For veterinary use, of course. My dog has severe anxiety." The diary. Edmund found it on a Thursday afternoon. Margot had taken him to the library for reading practice. They'd been working on simple books, picture stories with large text. But Edmund had wandered to a different shelf drawn by the leather binding of an old journal. It was pushed far back, hidden behind a row of decorative books that no one had touched in years. Edmund's small hands could reach where adult hands wouldn't have bothered looking. "Nana, what's this?" Margot turned from the bookshelf she'd been organizing. Edmund held a journal bound in purple leather, aged but well preserved. Her heart stopped when she saw the inscription on the cover. Eleanor Ravenscroft, Lucian's wife. Edmund's mother. Dead for 2 years. "Edmund, that's your mother's. We should ask your father before we—" But the boy had already opened it, his developing reading skills enough to make out the careful handwriting. Margot knelt beside him. She should stop this, should take the diary directly to Lucien. But something in her chest, some instinct she'd learned to trust, told her to look. Edmund's finger traced the words slowly. October 10th. Beatrice came to see me again today, 3rd time this week. She keeps warning me about the carriage. Says the axle looks weak. Says the brakes need inspection. The boy looked up at Margot. "What does inspection mean?" Margot's mouth had gone dry. "It means checking to make sure something works properly." Edmund turned the page. October 15th. Beatrice insisted again. She was very forceful. Said if I loved my son, I would have the carriage checked immediately. But we just had it serviced last month. Why is she so insistent? It feels strange, like she knows something. Another page. October 20th. I've decided to take a different carriage tomorrow when Lucienne and I go to the city. Beatrice's warnings have made me uncomfortable. She seems almost eager for something to happen. I can't explain it. Just a feeling. A mother's intuition, perhaps. The entries stopped there. The rest of the pages were blank. October 21st had been the accident. The day Eleanor Ravenscroft died. But according to the diary, she'd planned to take a different carriage. Something had changed her mind. Or someone had. Margot's hands trembled as she closed the journal. Edmund, this is very important. We need to keep this safe. Can you do something for me? The boy nodded solemnly. Put this back exactly where you found it. Don't tell anyone you saw it. Not your father, not Mrs. Thornhill. No one. Can you do that? Edmund's dark eyes were wide, sensing the seriousness in her tone. Why, Nana? Because sometimes grown-ups need to solve puzzles before they can explain them, and this is a very important puzzle. But I promise I'll figure it out. She helped Edmund return the diary to its hiding place, but her mind was already racing. Beatrice had warned Eleanor about the carriage, repeatedly, insistently. Eleanor had planned to take a different one. But she'd died in that carriage anyway, which meant either Eleanor had changed her mind or Beatrice had been there that day, had been close enough to influence which carriage was used, had been close enough to sabotage more than one vehicle if necessary. Margot photographed several pages with her phone hands shaking. Evidence. She needed evidence before making accusations against a woman who'd been part of this family for over a century. But as she and Edmund left the library, Margot didn't notice the small security camera mounted in the corner. Didn't see the red recording light. Didn't know that Beatrice in her study 3 floors above was watching the live feed on her laptop, watching Margot photograph the diary, watching her hide it again, watching Edmund promise to keep the secret. Beatrice's perfectly manicured fingers, nails painted crimson red freshly done that morning, drummed against her desk. The timetable had just accelerated. The dinner Lucian had insisted on it. A family dinner, all of them together at the formal dining table. Edmund included, not segregated in his room with a tray. He's part of this family, Lucian had announced that morning. And he's doing well enough to join us. Margot will supervise, make sure he doesn't overexert himself. Beatrice had smiled and agreed, though her eyes had flickered with something that might have been annoyance. The dining room at Ravenscroft Manor could seat 24. Tonight only 4 people occupied one end of the massive mahogany table. Lucienne at the head, Edmund in a high chair to his right, modified to provide extra support, but allowing him to sit with the family. Beatrice across from Edmund, and Margot standing behind the boy's chair ready to assist. "This is inappropriate, Lucienne," Beatrice said quietly, cutting into her chicken with precise movements. "Having the help at the family table." "Miss Brennan is here in a medical capacity," Lucian replied. "Dr. Bennett himself recommended she oversee Edmund's meals to ensure proper nutrition for muscle development." It was a lie, but a convenient one. Truthfully, Lucian wanted Margot present because Edmund smiled more when she was near, because the boy ate better, laughed louder, seemed more alive, because in 3 weeks Margot Brennan had given him back something he'd thought was lost forever, not just a son who could walk, but a son who had hope. Edmund banged his spoon against the table, giggling. "More potatoes, please." Margot leaned forward, cutting the food into smaller pieces. "Mind your manners, brave knight. What do we say? Please and thank you," Edmund recited dutifully. Beatrice watched the interaction with a face carefully arranged into pleasant neutrality. Inside she was counting seconds. She'd spent the afternoon in careful preparation. Latex gloves to avoid fingerprints. Identical vitamin bottles purchased from 3 different pharmacies. Precise measurements of the medication enough to cause a medical emergency, not enough to be immediately fatal. She needed Edmund sick, not dead. Needed Margot blamed, not suspected of murder. The bottle in her lap was ready. She just needed the right moment. "Edmund," Beatrice said suddenly, her voice sweet as poisoned honey. "Isn't it time for your vitamins? Dr. Bennett said you must take them with your evening meal." Margot nodded. "Yes, ma'am. I have them right here." She pulled a small amber bottle from her apron pocket, the same bottle she'd been giving Edmund for 3 weeks. Vitamin D and calcium supplements prescribed by Dr. Bennett to support bone development. Margot set the bottle on the table next to Edmund's plate and turned toward the sideboard to fetch water. It happened in the space of 3 seconds. Beatrice's napkin's silk cream-colored monogram fell from her lap, or appeared to fall. The movement was so natural, so clearly accidental. "Oh," she gasped. "My earring! I felt it come loose. The diamond must have fallen." Lucienne, by instinct and centuries of ingrained manners, immediately knelt to look under the table. Margot at the sideboard turned her head toward the commotion. Edmund, focused on pushing peas around his plate, didn't notice anything. And in that moment of collective blindness, Beatrice's hand moved. Years of practice made it smooth. She pulled the identical bottle from her lap, placed it on the table exactly where Margot's had been, and swept the original bottle into the folds of her dress. The whole operation took perhaps 2 seconds. "Found it," Beatrice announced, pretending to pluck something from the carpet. "False alarm. Just caught in my sleeve. How silly of me." Lucien rose, brushing off his trousers. Margot returned with the water glass. Neither had seen a thing. Margot picked up the bottle from the table, Beatrice's bottle, though she had no way of knowing, and measured out the drops onto a spoon. "Open wide, Edmund. Airplane coming in for landing." Edmund opened his mouth trustingly. He'd done this every night for 3 weeks. Trusted Margot completely. He swallowed the liquid without protest, though he made a small face. "Tastes icky," he complained. "Medicine isn't always sweet, my love, but it helps you grow strong." Margot gave him water to wash it down. Edmund drank, then returned to his dinner. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Conversation continued. Lucien asked about Edmund's progress. Margot described the exercises they'd done that day. Beatrice contributed the occasional comment, playing the concerned family member to perfection. Then Edmund's spoon clattered to his plate. Lucien looked up. "Edmund, are you finished, son?" The boy blinked slowly, his eyelids heavy. His head began to sway like a flower on a weak stem. "Sleepy." Edmund mumbled the word thick and slurred. "Edmund." Margot's voice sharpened with concern. She moved around the chair to see his face. The boy's eyes were unfocused, his pupils dilated, and as they watched, his small body went rigid for just a second, a tremor that ran through him like electricity. Then he collapsed forward, his face falling toward his plate. "Edmund!" Margot's scream tore through the dining room. Lucien lunged from his chair with vampire speed, reaching his son in an instant. He lifted Edmund's head, and his heart, which rarely beat with urgency, began to hammer against his ribs. The boy was limp, pale as wax, barely breathing. A thin line of foam appeared at the corner of his mouth. "My son!" Lucien's voice broke into something animal. He slapped Edmund's cheeks gently, desperately. "Wake up! Wake up!" Edmund's eyes rolled back in his head. Beatrice stood, her hand flying to her mouth in what appeared to be genuine horror. "My God!" she gasped. "It's poisoning. Look at him. Someone call an ambulance." She pointed an accusing finger at Margot, who stood frozen in shock. "It was her. She just gave him those drops. I saw the liquid looked strange, thicker than usual. I saw it, but I didn't say anything. Oh God, I should have said something." Margot's world tilted. "No, no, I only gave him his vitamins, the same ones I've given him every night." "Don't touch him!" Lucien roared when Margot reached for the boy. His eyes had gone black with terror and rage. He shoved her away with force that sent her stumbling against the wall. "Sir, please, I didn't." "She's lying," Beatrice interrupted, her voice rising with theatrical panic. "She probably gave him something to quiet him down. These ignorant people always do that. They drug children so they can slack off. Look at him, Lucien. She's killed him." Edmund let out a weak, choked sound. His breathing was becoming irregular, shallow. "Call an ambulance," Lucien shouted to no one and everyone. "Now!" He cradled his son and ran from the dining room, moving with supernatural speed toward the front entrance. Beatrice stayed behind for just a moment, long enough to look at Margot, who had slid down the wall to sit on the floor, tears streaming down her face. Beatrice knelt smoothly. She picked up the empty false bottle from the table and tucked it into her pocket. Then she pulled out another bottle, this one clearly labeled with a red skull and crossbones. High-potency sedatives, for adult use only. She let it roll across the floor until it stopped near Margot's feet. "Poor foolish girl," Beatrice whispered, her voice soft enough that only Margot could hear. "I told you to leave." Then she ran after Lucienne, her heels clicking rapidly, screaming for help in a voice that carried through the entire manor. Margot sat alone on the dining room floor, trembling as sirens began to wail in the distance. The bottle with the skull lay inches from her shoe, damning and irrefutable. And somewhere in Beatrice's pocket, the original vitamin bottle, the one with Margot's fingerprints all over it, was already being disposed of in a way that ensured it would never be found. The cage. The holding cell at the county police station was 8 feet by 10 feet. Concrete walls painted institutional beige. A metal cot bolted to the floor. A toilet without privacy. Fluorescent lights that never turned off. Margot sat on the cot, her blue uniform stained with grass from where she'd been tackled by police when they'd found her in the dining room. Her signature gloves had been confiscated, evidence they'd said. She clutched a photograph in her hands, the only personal item they'd allowed her to keep. Margot and her younger sister, taken 8 years ago, both smiling, both unaware of what was coming. Her sister had been 9 in that picture, paralyzed from the waist down after a car accident. Margot had been 18, studying for her nursing entrance exams. She'd promised to make her sister walk again, had learned everything she could about physical therapy, about rehabilitation, about refusing to accept limitation as destiny. Her supervisor at the hospital had warned her, "You can't practice therapy without credentials. You can't treat patients without authorization. I understand your passion, but there are rules." Margot had ignored him, had worked with her sister in secret, gentle exercises, massage, building strength gradually. It had been working. Her sister had regained some sensation, had moved her toes. And then one night, Margot had pushed too hard, too fast. Her sister had fallen during an exercise, fractured her femur. Infection had set in after the surgery. Sepsis. Death in 3 days. Margot had been 19 years old when she'd buried her sister, 20 when the hospital had fired her, 21 when the guilt had finally stopped being sharp enough to make her consider following her sister into the ground. She'd spent 5 years drifting, working jobs that required no credentials, housekeeping, cleaning, trying to forget that she'd once believed she could help people. And then she'd seen the advertisement for Ravenscroft Manor. Housekeeper needed, experience with children preferred. She'd taken it as a sign, a chance at redemption. Now she sat in a cell accused of the very thing she'd feared most, hurting a child instead of helping him. Edmund was alive. The police had told her that much, stabilized at the hospital after emergency treatment, but the charges against her were severe. Attempted murder, criminal negligence, evidence tampering. The bottle with the skull had her fingerprints on it. Of course it did. She'd picked it up when the police arrived, trying to understand what it was doing there. She'd played right into Beatrice's hands. Footsteps echoed in the corridor. Margot looked up, expecting a guard. Instead, Lucian Ravenscroft stood outside her cell. He looked like death. His normally immaculate appearance was disheveled. His eyes were hollow. His hands, usually so controlled, trembled slightly. "How is he?" Margot asked, immediately standing. "Please, is he alive?" Lucienne's voice was flat, dead. They pumped his stomach, high-dose benzodiazepines, enough to stop his breathing if they hadn't gotten to him in time. Margot closed her eyes, relief and horror warring in her chest. "Mr. Ravenscroft, I swear to you I didn't—" "Don't." He held up one hand. "Don't speak. I can't hear your voice right now without wanting to—" He stopped, turned away. His shoulders shook. "I trusted you. I let you into my home, into my son's life. I thought you were different, thought you actually cared about him. I do care about him more than you know. Edmund is—" You drugged my son." Lucien turned back and his eyes were black now, completely black, the vampire showing through the human facade. "You gave him adult sedatives. The evidence is clear. Your fingerprints are on the bottle, and when they searched your room they found—" He pulled out a piece of paper. A contract. Margot had never seen it before in her life. A forged employment agreement claiming you were owed $500,000 for specialized medical care, ready to sue the moment Edmund was incapacitated enough to make me vulnerable. Margot's legs gave out. She sat down hard on the cot. "That's not real. I never wrote that. I never even saw—" "Enough." Lucien's voice cracked like a whip. "The district attorney will file charges tomorrow. Attempted murder of a minor. You're looking at 20 years minimum, and I will testify against you. I will make sure you never see daylight again." He turned to leave. "Check the trash," Margot said desperately. "In the kitchen. Please, check the bottles in the trash." Lucien paused. "Check the security cameras, the backup files. Check everything. Because someone is lying to you, Mr. Ravenscroft. And it isn't me." He didn't respond, didn't look back. The sound of his footsteps fading down the corridor was the loneliest sound Margot had ever heard. The evidence. 72 hours. That's how long Edmund had been in the hospital. 3 days of touch and go of doctors monitoring his fragile recovery of Lucien, sitting beside a bed, willing his son to open his eyes. On the morning of the 4th day, Edmund woke up. "Daddy." The word was weak, confused, but it shattered something in Lucien's chest. "I'm here, son. I'm right here." "Where's Nana?" The question was a knife between his ribs. She's not here right now." Edmund's face crumpled. "Want Nana. Nana makes the hurt stop." Lucien held his son's hand, unable to answer. Dr. Bennett came in an hour later with Edmund's test results. The boy was recovering well, remarkably well considering. "The benzodiazepines are clearing his system," Bennett reported. "But I need to show you something else." He pulled up Edmund's muscle scans on the computer screen. "These are from 3 months ago, before Miss Brennan started working with him. The images showed atrophied muscles, minimal definition, and these are from last week, right before the incident." The difference was staggering. Muscle mass increased, nerve pathways lighting up in ways that the original scans had shown as dead. "Whatever therapy protocol she was using, it was working, Lucien. I've never seen recovery like this, not in 30 years of practice." Bennett hesitated. "Which is why the poisoning doesn't make sense." Lucien looked up sharply. "What do you mean? If her goal was to harm Edmund, why spend 3 weeks making him better first? Why document his progress so meticulously? I reviewed her notes. She kept detailed records of every session, every measurement, every milestone. That's not the behavior of someone planning to hurt him." The doctor pulled out a folder. "And the dosage bothers me. Whoever gave Edmund those sedatives knew exactly how much to use, enough to cause a medical emergency but not enough to be immediately fatal. That level of precision suggests medical knowledge." He paused. "Miss Brennan has medical training, but so does anyone with internet access and a pharmacy connection." Lucien stared at the scans, at the evidence of Edmund's improvement. "Check the trash," Margot had said. "Check the cameras." He'd dismissed it as the desperate plea of someone caught in the act. But what if no? The evidence was clear. The bottle had her fingerprints. The forged contract was in her handwriting. Except Lucien's mind, trained over centuries to spot inconsistencies, began to turn. Margot was 26 years old. She'd worked as a housekeeper for 5 years before coming to the manor. Before that, she'd been a nursing student. Where would she have learned to forge legal documents, and why would she document Edmund's progress so carefully if she planned to harm him, and why? Why had Beatrice been so insistent on him firing Margot from the very beginning? Lucien stood abruptly. "Stay with Edmund. I need to check something." He left the hospital at a run. The hunt. The kitchen trash bins at Ravenscroft Manor were emptied every Thursday. Today was Wednesday. Lucien stood in the service yard behind the manor, staring at 3 large green dumpsters. The collection service would come tomorrow morning. Everything inside would be gone, hauled away to a landfill 50 miles away. He'd spent 780 years as a creature of aristocratic refinement, had commanded armies, had dined with kings, had built an empire worth hundreds of millions, and now he was about to dig through garbage. Check the trash. Lucien rolled up his silk sleeves, took off his $1,000 jacket and dropped it on the ground. Opened the first dumpster. The smell hit him immediately. Even with vampire senses that could filter out most offensive odors, the combination of rotting food and chemical cleaning products was overwhelming. He began pulling out bags, ripping them open, sorting through coffee grounds and spoiled vegetables and discarded packaging. 10 bags, 20, 30. His hands were covered in filth. His shirt was ruined. He looked like something that had crawled out of hell. And then in the 43rd bag, buried under napkins and food waste, he found it. A small white bag, the kind used in bathroom bins, knotted tightly. Lucien opened it with trembling fingers. Inside were makeup-stained tissues, cotton pads with traces of foundation, and a small empty glass bottle. He pulled it out, holding it up to the sunlight. It wasn't the vitamin bottle that Margot had used. The label was different, the size slightly off. But what made Lucien's ancient heart stop was the smudge on the white label. A fingerprint, left by someone who had touched the bottle right after applying fresh nail polish. The print was crimson red, unmistakable, perfect. Margot didn't wear makeup. Her nails were always short and clean, unpolished. But Beatrice had gotten her nails done the morning of the dinner. Lucien remembered because she'd shown them off, complaining about the salon's prices. Crimson red, exactly this shade. He held the bottle closer. Stuck to the bottom, caught in the last traces of liquid, was a long strand of hair, dyed blonde, Beatrice's exact color. Margot had dark brown hair, natural, always pulled back in a practical bun. Lucien carefully placed the bottle in his pocket. His hands were shaking now, not with fear, but with a rage so cold and deep it frightened even him. He pulled out his phone and called his head of security. "Marcus, I need you to access the backup security system, the cloud servers that auto-upload every hour." "Sir, those files are enormous." "What am I looking for?" "Dining room footage, the night of Edmund's incident. Everything from 3 angles if we have it." "I'll have it within the hour." Lucien stood in this garbage yard covered in filth, holding evidence that would destroy a woman who had been part of his family for 150 years. And all he could think was, how many times has she done this before? The tape. The security office in Ravenscroft Manor was tucked away on the 3rd floor, a room that Lucien visited perhaps twice a year. The head of security, Marcus, had the footage ready when he arrived. "Sir, you should see this." Marcus pulled up the video. The timestamp read 6:47 p.m. Dinner time. Lucien watched himself sit at the head of the table, watched Edmund in his high chair, happy and animated, watched Margot standing attentively behind the boy's chair, and watched Beatrice across the table, her face a mask of pleasant neutrality. "There," Marcus said, pointing to the screen. "Watch Mrs. Thornhill's right hand." Beatrice's napkin fell. Lucien knelt to search for the earring. Margot turned toward the sideboard, and in that 3-second window, Beatrice's hand moved. The camera caught it perfectly. The angle was clear. There was no ambiguity. She pulled a bottle from her lap, placed it on the table, swept the original bottle into her dress pocket. The entire operation took 2 seconds. "Dear God," Lucien whispered. "There's more, sir. I pulled footage from other days." Marcus loaded another file. This one from 2 weeks earlier. The library. It showed Edmund finding the diary, showed Margot reading it with him, showed her photographing pages. And in the corner of the screen, visible in the reflection of a mirror, was Beatrice, standing in the hallway, watching. Another file. Edmund's bedroom, late at night. Beatrice entering, standing over the sleeping boy, her lips moving. Marcus had enhanced the audio. It was faint but clear enough. "Useless thing. Your father doesn't love you. You're just a burden he's too weak to dispose of." Edmund stirred in his sleep. Beatrice pinched his arm, hard. The boy cried out. She adjusted his pajamas to hide the mark and left. Lucien had to grip the desk to stay upright. "How many videos like this are there?" Marcus's face was grim. "Dozens, sir, going back months. I've compiled them all. Send them to my private server, and to my attorney, immediately." "Yes, sir." Lucien stood. His reflection in the dark computer screen showed a man transformed. Not the grieving father, not the uncertain lord. A vampire who had made kingdoms fall, who had survived 7 centuries by knowing exactly when to be merciful and when to be merciless. "Marcus, I need you to do one more thing." "Anything, sir." "I need you to go to the county jail. You're authorized to post bail for Margot Brennan. Bring her home." Marcus didn't question the order, simply nodded. "And Marcus, no one else knows about this, especially not Mrs. Thornhill." "Understood, sir." Lucien left the security office and walked directly to the East Wing, to Beatrice's private quarters. He found her in her study, reviewing documents. She looked up with a smile when he entered. "Lucien, darling, how's Edmund doing? I've been so worried. You poisoned him." The words dropped into the room like stones into still water. Beatrice's smile didn't waver. "I'm sorry, what—" "You switched the vitamin bottles. I have video footage. I have the original bottle with your fingerprints and your hair. I have recordings of you abusing Edmund in his sleep." Her smile finally cracked, just slightly. "I have everything, Beatrice. The question is why? Why would you hurt an innocent child?" For a long moment she said nothing. Then slowly she stood. "Because he's not innocent," she said quietly. "He's your brother's blood, Alaric's blood, and I've hated that bloodline for 150 years. Lucien felt the world tilt. "Alaric, your brother." Beatrice spat the word like poison, promised to marry me, swore eternal love, let me believe I would be part of this family, and then he chose that insipid American heiress instead, cast me aside like garbage. Her voice was rising now, years of buried rage finally surfacing. "So I made sure he never got to enjoy his perfect little life. The carriage accident was so easy to arrange, and when Eleanor asked questions, started writing in that ridiculous diary, well, she had to go too. You killed Eleanor." It wasn't a question. "I killed them both, and I would have killed that boy too if you'd just let nature take its course, but you had to bring in that bleeding heart Maid, had to give him hope." Beatrice laughed, and it sounded like breaking glass. "I've been managing this estate for 150 years, Lucien, skimming just enough that no one noticed, building my own fortune while playing the loyal family member. Edmund getting better meant you'd take control back, meant you'd audit, meant you'd find what I'd taken." She picked up a letter opener from her desk, not threatening, just holding it, a small gesture of defiance. "So yes, I poisoned him. I framed that stupid girl, and I'd do it again." Lucien's phone was in his pocket, recording every word. "You're going to prison, Beatrice, for the rest of your very long life." She smiled. "Am I? Or am I going to disappear before any mortal police force can touch me? I've survived this long by knowing when to cut my losses." She moved toward the window. Lucien could have stopped her, could have used vampire speed to catch her, but he didn't, because standing in the doorway behind him, holding a phone that had recorded every word, was Margot Brennan, and behind her were 3 police officers. Beatrice saw them. Her face went white. "I believe you'll find it harder to run than you think," Lucien said quietly. "I've frozen all accounts associated with this estate. You have no money, no resources, and nowhere to hide." The police moved forward. "Beatrice Thornhill, you're under arrest for the murder of Alaric Ravenscroft, Eleanor Ravenscroft, and the attempted murder of Edmund Ravenscroft. You have the right to remain silent." As they read her rights and placed her in handcuffs, Beatrice looked at Margot with pure hatred. "You destroyed everything," she hissed. Margot met her gaze steadily. "No, ma'am. I saved a little boy. There's a difference." They led Beatrice away, her expensive heels clicking one final time against the marble floors she'd walked for over a century. Lucien and Margot stood alone in the study. "I'm sorry," Lucien said finally. His voice cracked. "I'm so deeply, profoundly sorry." Margot looked at him. At this man who had lived for centuries, who commanded empires, who had just watched his family's darkest secrets exposed. "Edmund is asking for both of us," she said quietly. "Perhaps we should give him what he actually needs. A father who trusts, and someone who teaches him that trust can be earned back." Lucien nodded, unable to speak. Together they walked toward the hospital, toward the boy who had brought them both to this moment. The boy who, against all odds and medical opinion, was learning to walk, and in doing so, had taught them both something about standing up. 3 weeks had passed since Beatrice's arrest. Edmund was home from the hospital, recovering well. The benzodiazepines had cleared his system completely. His physical therapy with Margot had resumed, though with modified exercises to account for the setback. But tonight was different. Tonight Beatrice had demanded a final meeting before her transfer to a federal facility. Her lawyers claimed she had information about estate finances that would be lost forever if she didn't share it. Lucien's attorneys thought it was a manipulation tactic, but Lucien had agreed, not for the financial information, for closure. The formal dining room, the site of the poisoning, had been chosen deliberately. Lucien wanted Beatrice to face the scene of her crime. The table was set for 6. At the head sat Lucien, looking every inch the lord who had commanded armies. To his right was Margot, dressed in a fresh blue uniform, clean-pressed, dignified. To Lucien's left, 2 FBI agents in dark suits. Behind them, local police officers who had escorted Beatrice from the county jail. And at the far end of the table, in handcuffs and an orange jumpsuit that stripped away every ounce of her former elegance, sat Beatrice Thornhill. Her blonde hair was unwashed. Her face was bare of makeup. She looked every one of her 48 years plus the century and a half she'd lived before that. But her ice-blue eyes were still sharp, still calculating. "This is unnecessary theater, Lucien," she said, her voice tired but carrying a hint of her old authority. "I've already confessed. What more do you want from me?" "I want the truth," Lucien replied. "All of it. The lawyers say you have information about the estate finances, about accounts and holdings that only you know about. Give us that information and you'll be transferred to a facility with better conditions. Refuse and you'll spend the next 100 years in maximum security isolation." Beatrice laughed, a sound like breaking china. "You think I care about comfort now? Everything I worked for is gone. Everything I built over 150 years of careful planning, destroyed by a housemaid with rubber gloves." Her gaze shifted to Margot. "You must be very proud of yourself, the noble servant who saved the helpless child from the wicked witch." Margot met her stare without flinching. "I'm not proud. I'm heartbroken. Because Edmund loved you. He called you Aunt B, and you hurt him in ways that have nothing to do with poison." Something flickered in Beatrice's expression, just for a moment. "The boy is weak, like his father was weak. Like all the Ravenscroft men are weak. They love too easily, trust too completely. Your brother," she looked at Lucien, "swore eternal devotion to me, promised marriage, made me believe I would finally belong to something. And then he chose that American heiress because she had a prettier face and a bigger trust fund." Her voice was rising now, years of buried pain surfacing like poison from a wound. "So, yes, I killed him. I sabotaged that carriage and I watched him die, and I felt nothing but satisfaction, because he deserved it for making me love him, for making me weak." "And Eleanor?" Lucien's voice was very quiet, very dangerous. "What did she do to deserve death?" She asked questions, found that ridiculous diary and started writing down her suspicions. "She was going to show it to you, going to destroy everything I'd built. So I made sure the brakes failed on the car she actually used, made sure she wouldn't survive to tell her tales." Beatrice leaned forward, chains rattling. "And Edmund. That child is the last piece of Alaric walking around breathing, taking up space that should have been mine. Every time I looked at him, I saw the man who destroyed me. So yes, I wanted him gone. wanted him dependent and broken and useless, wanted you to finally understand what it feels like to lose everything that matters. The silence that followed was absolute. One of the FBI agents cleared his throat. "Mrs. Thornhill, this is all being recorded. Every word you're saying is—" "I know what it is," Beatrice snapped. "I don't care anymore. What are you going to do? Give me extra centuries in prison? I'm already immortal. Time means nothing." Lucien stood. His hands were clenched at his sides. "You're right about one thing. I did love too easily, trusted too completely. I let you into my home, my family, my son's life, and you betrayed all of it." He walked around the table until he stood directly in front of her. "But you're wrong about weakness. Love isn't weakness, Beatrice. It's the only strength that matters. And you've never known that. You've never loved anything except your own wounded pride. That's why you're here in chains, having lost everything, not because you were rejected, but because you never learned what it means to care about something beyond yourself." Beatrice looked up at him, and for the first time tears appeared in her eyes. "I loved your brother." "No," Lucien said quietly. "You loved what he represented. The status, the belonging, the validation. That's not love, that's transaction. And when the transaction fell through, you destroyed everyone around you rather than accept that maybe, just maybe, you weren't owed what you wanted." He turned to the FBI agents. "She'll cooperate with a financial disclosure, I'll make sure of it. But this conversation is over. Take her away." As the agent stood, Beatrice spoke one last time. "Wait, there's one thing. About Edmund." Lucien froze. "What about my son? I didn't poison him to kill him. I poisoned him to scare him, to make him afraid of getting better, to make you afraid of hope." She looked at Margot. "I wanted you to fire her, to lose faith, to go back to the safe misery of accepting that the boy would never walk." Her voice cracked. "Because if he recovered, I lost my leverage, lost the trust clause, lost control. But the dosage, I calculated it precisely, enough to cause distress, not enough to be fatal. I'm a monster, Lucien, but I'm not a child killer." Margot stood abruptly. "That's supposed to make it better. You terrorized a 3-year-old child, made him think his body was betraying him, made him afraid to trust the people trying to help him. The physical damage might have been calculated, but the emotional damage—" She stopped, breathing hard. "That will take years to heal, if it ever does." Beatrice looked away. "I know." And in that moment she looked less like a villain and more like a woman who had spent 150 years nursing a grudge until it consumed everything human left inside her. They led her out. Margot and Lucien sat in the empty dining room surrounded by the ghosts of all the meals that had been served at this table, all the decisions made, all the lives shaped. "It's not enough," Margot said finally. "Her confession, her prison sentence, none of it undoes what she did to Edmund." "No," Lucien agreed. "But it's what we have. The question is what we do with it." He looked at her. "Edmund needs to know he's safe now, needs to understand that the person who hurt him can't reach him anymore. But he also needs—" Lucien's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his expression shifted. "It's Marcus. Edmund he's at the East Garden, near the pool." They both stood and ran. The pool. They found Edmund exactly where Marcus had said. The boy sat in his wheelchair at the edge of the manor's swimming pool, an elegant structure 40 feet long surrounded by stone imported from Italy. The water was dark in the evening light, deep at the far end, 12 feet marked by a depth gauge. Edmund had removed his shirt. He wore only small swimming trunks, and standing behind his wheelchair was Beatrice. She'd escaped. During the transfer from the dining room to the police van, she'd overpowered the 2 officers with vampire strength they'd been warned about but hadn't truly believed in. The restraints designed for humans had been inadequate. She'd moved with speed that left them unconscious before they could radio for help, and she'd come straight here. "Don't come closer," Beatrice called out when she saw Lucienne and Margot emerge from the house. Lucienne froze on the terrace steps. "Beatrice, whatever you're thinking—" "I'm thinking that I have nothing left to lose," she interrupted. "Prison is waiting for me. Isolation. Centuries of empty time. But before I go, I wanted to see if you'd make the same choice your brother made." She pushed the wheelchair forward 6 inches. The front wheels were now at the very edge of the pool. Edmund made a small sound of fear. "Me, or the boy Lucienne. Just like Alaric chose that woman over me. Choose now. Let me go or I push him in. We both know he can't swim. We both know what happens if he goes into deep water." Margot's hand went to her pocket instinctively, but she had nothing. No phone, no weapon. Just her own body and the desperate need to protect the child she'd spent 3 weeks teaching to walk. "Beatrice, please." Margot stepped forward slowly, hands raised. "This isn't you. I've seen the way you looked at him sometimes. There's still something in you that remembers how to care. Use it now. Step away from the boy." "You don't know me," Beatrice hissed. "You've been here 3 weeks. I've been part of this family for 150 years. I've earned the right to—" "To what?" Lucien's voice cut through her words like a blade. "To murder a child because you can't accept that my brother didn't love you, to destroy everything beautiful in the world because you're in pain." He took a step forward. "Let him go, Beatrice. You want revenge? Take it on me. I'm the one who failed to see what you were. I'm the one who let you stay. I'm the one who's responsible. But Edmund is innocent." "No one is innocent," Beatrice whispered. And she pushed. The wheelchair rolled forward, tipped over the edge, and plunged into the dark water. Everything happened in the space of 3 seconds. Lucienne screamed and ran, but he was 30 feet away. The wheelchair hit the water, twisted, began to sink. And Margot jumped. She didn't think about it. Didn't remember that her mother had drowned when Margot was 12. Didn't remember the years of nightmares, the panic attacks at the beach, the absolute terror that water represented. She just jumped. The cold was shocking, the darkness disorienting. But she saw Edmund, saw his small body struggling against the wheelchair's safety belt, his eyes wide with terror, bubbles escaping his mouth. Margot dove down. Her lungs were already burning, her clothing dragged at her limbs. But she reached Edmund, found the belt buckle, fought with it in the murky water. Click. The belt released. She grabbed Edmund and pushed upward, kicking with everything she had. The boy was small but dead weight. The surface seemed impossibly far. Her vision was starting to darken around the edges, her body screaming for air. They broke the surface with a gasp. Edmund coughed, water streaming from his mouth. Margot kicked toward the edge, her free arm barely keeping them both afloat. Strong hands grabbed Edmund, pulled him from the water. "Lucienne." Then Margot felt something grab her ankle. She looked down through the water and saw the wheelchair. Her dress had caught in the wheel assembly. The weight was pulling her down. She took a breath and dove again, trying to free the fabric. But it was tangled, twisted. Every movement seemed to make it worse. Her lungs burned, her vision tunneled. And then Lucienne was there, underwater beside her. He grabbed the dress and tore it with vampire strength, the fabric ripping like paper. He pulled her to the surface, helped her to the edge, hauled her out of the water with Edmund crying and reaching for her. Margot collapsed on the stone, coughing water, gasping for air. "Nana." Edmund threw himself at her, sobbing. "I was scared. The lady pushed me." Margot wrapped her arms around him, holding him close despite her own shaking. "I know, brave knight, I know. But you're safe now. You're safe." Lucienne looked around wildly. "Where's Beatrice?" The security team had arrived, police right behind them. But the area around the pool was empty. Marcus approached, phone in hand. "Sir, we have her on camera leaving through the west gate. She's heading toward the woods." "Let her go," Lucienne said quietly. Everyone stared at him. "Sir," Marcus asked. "I said let her go. Post guards at the property line. Alert the authorities. But don't pursue. She's already in her own prison. One she built herself. One she'll never escape." He knelt beside Margot and Edmund, checking them both for injuries. "Are you hurt? Either of you?" Edmund shook his head. Nana saved me. She jumped even though she's scared of water. She told me once. Margot looked at the boy in surprise. You remember that? I remember everything you tell me, because you're the only one who doesn't lie. Lucian felt something in his chest crack open. This woman had faced her greatest fear to save his son, had risked everything, including her own life, without hesitation. And she'd done it after he'd abandoned her, after he'd let her spend 3 days in a cell for a crime she didn't commit. Margot, he said, his voice rough with emotion. She looked up at him. Come inside, both of you. We need to get dry and warm, and then we need to talk. The truth. The library at Ravenscroft Manor had a fireplace large enough to stand in. Lucian had it blazing, the heat slowly driving the chill from the room. Margot sat in an oversized armchair wrapped in blankets. Edmund was curled in her lap, finally calm enough to stop shaking. The boy had refused to let her go, his small hands gripping her shirt like she might disappear if he loosened his hold. Lucien sat across from them, also wrapped in dry clothes, but looking like he'd aged a century in the past hour. I need to tell you something, he began. About Beatrice. About this family. About why I was so quick to believe the worst. Margot waited. When my brother Alaric died, I was 190 years old. I thought I'd seen everything, experienced every kind of pain. But losing him, losing the only family I had left from my mortal life, it broke something in me. He stared into the fire. Beatrice was there afterward, constantly. She helped me through the grief, managed the estate when I couldn't function, became the one stable thing in a world that had tilted on its axis, and I never questioned it, never asked why she was so devoted, never looked closely at her motivations. Because grief makes us blind, Margot said softly. It makes us cling to whatever feels safe, even if that safety is an illusion. Yes. Lucien looked at her. And when Eleanor died, when Edmund was injured, I did it again. Let Beatrice take control because I couldn't face managing everything myself. Let her make decisions because it was easier than accepting responsibility. He leaned forward. So when she accused you, when evidence appeared that seemed damning, I believed it. Not because it made sense, but because doubting her meant admitting I'd been played for 150 years, meant accepting that I'd let a murderer live in my home, care for my son, control my life. Edmund stirred in Margot's lap. Aunt Bee was mean to me. When you weren't there, Daddy. She said bad things. Lucien's hands clenched. I know, son. I saw the videos, and I'm sorry. I should have protected you better. But Nana protected me. Nana always protects me. The boy's simple faith made Margot's eyes burn with unshed tears. Edmund, Lucien said carefully, can I talk to Nana alone for a few minutes? Marcus is right outside. He'll take you to the kitchen for hot chocolate. Edmund looked uncertain. Will Nana be here when I come back? I promise, Margot said. I'm not going anywhere. Marcus appeared as if summoned, offering Edmund his hand. The boy went reluctantly, looking back every few steps until he disappeared around the corner. Lucien waited until they were alone. Then he stood, walked over to Margot's chair and knelt. A vampire lord who had lived 780 years, who had commanded armies and built empires and bent kingdoms to his will, kneeling before a 26-year-old woman in a borrowed dress. Forgive me, he said simply. I don't deserve it. I know I don't. But I'm asking anyway. Forgive me for doubting you, for abandoning you, for being so blinded by my own fear that I couldn't see the truth even when it was standing right in front of me. Margot looked down at him, this ancient being made humble by his own mistakes. You already have my forgiveness, she said quietly. I gave it the moment I saw Edmund in that hospital bed and understood that you were acting out of love. Misguided, fearful love, but love nonetheless. She touched his shoulder gently. What I need from you isn't apology. It's trust, real trust, the kind that doesn't evaporate the moment something goes wrong. Can you give me that? Lucien looked up at her and his eyes were bright with emotion. Yes, I can. I will. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. I bought this 700 years ago. It was meant for someone I loved in another lifetime, but she died before I could give it to her. I've carried it ever since, waiting for someone who deserved it." He opened the box. Inside was a charm made of gold shaped like a small hand, and in the palm of that hand, a single diamond. "It's not a ring," Lucien said. "It's not a proposal. Not yet. Because you deserve better than a man on his knees because of guilt. You deserve to be chosen when I'm standing upright, when I'm not broken by crisis, when I can offer you something real." He held out the charm. "But I want you to have this, as a promise, that I see you, that I value you, that you've changed my life and my son's life in ways I'm still trying to understand, and that when you're ready, if you're ever ready, I'll ask you properly, not as an employer, not as a lord, but as a man who spent centuries looking for someone like you and didn't know it until you showed up with impossible optimism." Margot took the charm with shaking fingers. "It's beautiful. But Lucien, you don't have to answer now. Take your time. Take all the time you need. Just know that the position of governess has been permanently upgraded. You're Edmund's primary caretaker now, with a salary that reflects the impossible work you're doing, and a room in the family wing, not the servants' quarters." He stood, and his voice became formal, professional. $2,500 per week, full medical benefits, 4 weeks paid vacation, and a contract that states clearly you answer only to me and your medical decisions regarding Edmund are final. Margot stared at him. That's more than most doctors make. You're worth more than most doctors. You gave my son back his legs and his voice and his hope. You saved his life tonight at risk of your own. Money is the least I can offer. I didn't do it for money." "I know. That's exactly why you deserve it." Edmund's voice called from the hallway. "Nana Marcus says there's cookies too." Margot smiled despite the emotional whiplash of the past few minutes. "Go to him," Lucien said. "I have some calls to make, legal issues to resolve, a security system to overhaul since apparently it was woefully inadequate." He paused at the door. "And Margot, thank you. For jumping. For staying. For being exactly who you are." He left before she could respond. Margot sat alone in the library holding a golden charm that probably cost more than she'd earned in 5 years listening to a child call for her with absolute trust. She had a choice to make. Walk away from the complications of this family, from the trauma and the danger and the impossible situation of falling for a man who'd lived 7 centuries, or stay. Trust that sometimes broken things could be repaired, that sometimes the people who hurt you could learn to do better, that sometimes love was worth the risk. Edmund appeared in the doorway, Marcus behind him. "Nana, are you coming? The cookies are really good and Marcus says I can have 2 if you say it's okay." Margot stood tucking the charm into her pocket. 2 cookies sounds perfect, brave knight. Let's go." As she took Edmund's hand and walked toward the kitchen, she realized she'd already made her choice. She was staying. 18 months later. Spring had returned to Ravenscroft Manor. The gardens were in full bloom, roses and lilies and flowers whose names Margot was still learning. The pool had been drained, cleaned, and refilled, new safety gates installed, new protocols established, and in the center of the east lawn, a small boy was running. Edmund Ravenscroft was 5 years old now, tall for his age, strong. His dark hair caught the sunlight as he sprinted across the grass, chasing a butterfly with single-minded determination. No wheelchair in sight, no assistive devices, just a boy running completely unaware that 2 years ago 15 doctors had said he'd never take a single step. Margot watched from the terrace, a cup of tea in her hands. She wore a simple blue dress, not a uniform anymore, but her own choice. She'd kept the color. It felt right. On her left hand, she wore a ring. Lucien had proposed 6 months ago, not on his knees in crisis, but standing in this same garden with Edmund holding the ring box and giggling at his role in the surprise. "Marry me," Lucien had said simply, "not because you've earned it, not because I owe you, but because I love you, Because Edmund loves you. Because you make this 780-year-old heart remember what it feels like to be alive." She'd said yes before he finished speaking. The wedding was scheduled for next month. Small, intimate, just family and close friends in the garden where Edmund had taken his first steps. "He's getting faster," Lucian said, joining her on the terrace. He carried a tablet showing the latest medical reports. "Dr. Bennett says his muscle development is now above average for his age group. No residual effects from the paralysis at all." "He works hard," Margot replied. "Every morning exercises without complaining. He's earned every bit of that strength." Edmund saw them watching and waved enthusiastically. Then he did something that made both adults catch their breath. He performed a perfect cartwheel. "When did he learn that?" Lucian asked. "Last week. YouTube tutorial. He's been practicing in secret." Margot smiled. "He wanted to surprise you." Edmund ran over, barely winded. "Did you see Daddy? Did you see what I can do?" Lucian scooped him up, spinning him in a circle. "I saw champion. You're amazing. Nana taught me how to be strong. She said muscles are like courage. You have to use them every day, or they get small." He wriggled to be put down and ran over to hug Margot's legs. "I love you, Nana. You're going to be my real mama soon, right? That's what the wedding means." Margot knelt to his level. "That's exactly what it means. I'll be your mama, and we'll be a real family." "We're already a real family," Edmund said seriously. "We just didn't have the party yet." Out of the mouths of children, Margot thought. Truth delivered without complexity. Marcus approached from the house looking apologetic. "Sir, there's a letter. It came through the legal team. From Beatrice Thornhill." The atmosphere shifted instantly. Edmund, sensing the tension, moved closer to Margot. Lucien took the envelope. "Thank you, Marcus." He opened it, read silently. His expression was unreadable. "What does it say?" Margot asked quietly. "She's in a facility in northern Canada. Maximum security. They caught her 3 days after the pool incident. She's been there for 17 months. He handed Margot the letter. The handwriting was shaky, uncertain. Nothing like the confident script Beatrice had used before. "Dear Lucien, I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But my therapist says I should try to make amends where possible, even if those amends are rejected. I killed your brother because he hurt me, and I couldn't accept that sometimes people don't love us back. I killed Eleanor because she threatened to expose me, and I valued my position more than her life. I tried to kill Edmund because he represented everything I thought I deserved and didn't get. I was wrong, about all of it. The truth is, I never learned how to love anything except my own pain. I nursed it for 150 years until it became the only thing I knew how to feel. I'm learning now in this cold cell what it means to let go of old wounds. It's harder than killing, harder than lying, harder than anything I've ever done. I heard through the legal channels that Edmund is walking, running, thriving. That should make me angry. Instead, I feel something I haven't felt in over a century. Relief. Because maybe, just maybe, if that boy can walk again after everything I did to him, then maybe broken things can be repaired. Maybe redemption is possible. Even for monsters. I'm starting a program here for other inmates, teaching them financial literacy, using the skills I developed over a century of managing estates to help people who have nothing build something. It's not much. It doesn't undo what I did, but it's something. Tell Edmund I'm sorry. He won't remember me, and that's for the best. But tell him anyway. Tell him that the person who hurt him is learning to be better, and that his strength, his impossible, miraculous strength, taught me that giving up is a choice, and I'm choosing differently now. I don't expect a response. I don't deserve one, but I wanted you to know. I'm sorry." Beatrice Margot finished reading and handed the letter back to Lucien. "Do you believe her?" "I don't know," Lucien said honestly. "Maybe, maybe not. Does it matter?" "It matters to Edmund. He deserves to know that even the person who hurt him most can change. That's a powerful lesson." Edmund tugged on Margot's dress. "What does the letter say?" Lucian knelt down to his son's level. "It says that someone who was very mean to you is learning to be kind, and that she's sorry for what she did. You don't have to forgive her, Edmund, but you should know that people can change if they work hard enough at it." Edmund considered this seriously. "Like how I changed from not walking to walking, exactly like that. Then I hope she gets better, like I got better." He said it with the casual grace of a child who hadn't yet learned to hold grudges, who still believed in second chances because he'd been given one himself. Lucian looked at Margot over their son's head. She saw the question in his eyes. "Is this what we're teaching him? Forgiveness even for the unforgivable?" She nodded slightly. "Yes, because forgiveness isn't about them, it's about us, about choosing not to carry poison in our own hearts." "Come on," Margot said, standing and offering Edmund her hand. "Let's go practice your wedding duties. You're carrying the rings, remember? That's a very important job." Edmund brightened immediately. "Can I practice with the real rings?" "Nice try. You get the practice rings until the actual day." As they walked toward the house, Edmund between them holding both their hands, Lucian felt something settle in his chest. This was family. This imperfect, pieced-together, hard-won family. A vampire who'd spent centuries alone. A woman who'd lost her sister and found her purpose. A boy who'd been told he'd never walk and ran anyway. They'd all been broken in different ways. And somehow, in finding each other, they'd become whole. The wedding. The day arrived with perfect weather. 72 degrees, clear skies, a breeze that carried the scent of roses and lilies across the manicured lawns of Ravenscroft Manor. 300 guests filled white chairs arranged in a semicircle around the garden fountain, the same fountain where Edmund had taken his first steps, where this impossible story had truly begun. Margot stood in her dressing room looking at herself in the mirror. The dress was simple. Cream lace with long sleeves and a train that wouldn't be too difficult to manage on grass. Her hair was down natural waves touching her shoulders. Minimal makeup. But on her dresser, carefully placed where she could see them, were her yellow gloves. She'd cleaned them, preserved them. They were her crown, her badge of honor, the thing that had started everything. A knock on the door. "Come in." Edmund entered, dressed in a tiny suit that made him look impossibly grown up. He carried a small pillow with the rings tied securely. "You look pretty, Mama." He'd started calling her that a week ago, practicing. "Are you ready?" "Almost. But first I need help with something." She picked up the gloves and carefully attached them to her bouquet white roses wrapped in blue ribbon. The gloves didn't match. They clashed completely with the elegant aesthetic. They were perfect. "There," Margot said. "Now I'm ready." The music started. Violin and piano playing a waltz that Lucian had commissioned specifically for today. Edmund walked down the aisle first, moving with the careful precision of a child who knows everyone is watching. He didn't stumble, didn't hesitate. At the altar, Lucian took the rings with shaking hands. "Good job, son," he whispered. Edmund beamed and went to sit in the front row beside Dr. Bennett, who'd become something of an honorary uncle over the past year. Then Margot appeared at the top of the aisle. The guests gasped, not at the dress, though it was beautiful, not at her appearance, though she was radiant. They gasped at the yellow gloves attached to her bouquet, visible and undeniable and completely unexpected in a formal ceremony. Margot walked down the aisle alone. No father to give her away, he'd died years ago. No need for anyone to transfer ownership of her from one man to another. She walked herself down that aisle with her head high and her symbol of hope displayed proudly. Lucian watched her approach, and his eyes were bright with tears he didn't bother to hide. She'd kept them, the symbol of everything she was, everything she'd given them. The ceremony was brief, traditional vows with a few personal additions. When it came time for Lucian to speak, he turned to face the assembled guests. 780 years ago, I was born into a world very different from this one. I've seen empires rise and fall. I've witnessed wars and plagues and revolutions. I thought I'd experienced everything life had to offer. He looked at Margot. And then a woman walked into my home and taught me that I knew nothing. Nothing about courage, nothing about faith, nothing about real strength. He took her hands. Margot Brennan, you saved my son's life. But more than that, you saved mine. You taught me that 7 centuries of existence mean nothing if you're not living. That power means nothing if you don't use it to protect what matters. That pride is just fear in expensive clothing. He glanced at Edmund. You taught us both how to walk, not just in the literal sense, though watching Edmund run is still the greatest joy of my immortal life, but in the metaphorical sense. How to move forward when the past is heavy. How to stand up when falling down feels easier. How to take that next step even when you're terrified. He pulled out the ring's simple gold bands, nothing ostentatious. I promise to spend the rest of my very long life being worthy of you, to never again let fear make me blind, to trust you completely, to stand beside you as an equal partner, to honor the strength in your determination and the heart that chose to stay when leaving would have been justified. Margot's turn. She took a steadying breath. I came to this manor expecting to clean floors and dust furniture. Instead, I found a family that needed healing more than housekeeping, a boy who needed to believe in himself, and a man who needed to remember that living and surviving aren't the same thing. She looked at Edmund, then back at Lucienne. You both taught me that the mistakes of our past don't define our future, that my sister's death wasn't a failure, it was a lesson in how fragile and precious life is, that sometimes the people who need help most are the ones who seem like they need it least. She held up her bouquet, the yellow visible against white roses. These gloves cost $2. They're not elegant. They don't match this dress, but they represent something important, that value isn't measured in price tags. That the simplest tools applied with love and persistence can accomplish miracles that $800,000 of equipment cannot. She smiled. I promise to be your partner, your equal, your friend. To love Edmund as fiercely as if I'd carried him myself. To remind you when you forget that strength comes in many forms. To keep these as a reminder that we started this journey in a garden with hope and the audacity to believe in impossible things. The officiant pronounced them married. Lucien kissed his wife for the first time as the garden erupted in applause, and then Edmund, who couldn't contain himself any longer, ran up and hugged them both. We're a family now, a real family. The reception was held on the lawn, dancing and toasts and celebration. But the moment that made the local news, the moment that went viral online and was shared millions of times, came during the father-son dance. Lucien had chosen to dance with Edmund instead of doing a traditional mother-son dance. It seemed more appropriate. Halfway through the waltz, Edmund whispered something to his father. Lucien nodded. The music stopped. Edmund walked to the center of the dance floor. Alone. He looked at the assembled guests and spoke in his clear young voice. When I was little, I couldn't walk. The doctors said I never would. They said my legs were broken forever. He paused. But my new mama said that broken doesn't mean finished, that sometimes you just need the right person to believe in you. He pointed to the starting position of the aisle. So I'm going to walk now, from there to here, to show everyone what happens when someone believes in you even when you don't believe in yourself. The crowd went silent. Edmund positioned himself at the top of the aisle, the same distance Margot had just walked, perhaps 50 feet. He was 5 years old. He'd been walking consistently for over a year. But this was different. This was performance, pressure. Margot held her breath. Edmund took his first step, then another, then another. He didn't rush, didn't run, just walked with steady determination, his small frame silhouetted against the setting sun. 30 feet, 40 feet. His legs trembled slightly. The effort was visible. 45 feet. He stumbled his ankle, turning slightly. Gasps from the crowd. But Edmund caught himself, steadied, kept going. 50 feet. He reached his parents and threw his arms around them both. I walked, just like you taught me, Mama, one step at a time. There wasn't a dry eye in the garden. Doctor. Bennett stood in the back, openly weeping. That boy was supposed to be paralyzed for life. The photographer captured the moment perfectly. Lucienne and Margot kneeling, Edmund between them, the yellow symbol visible in Margot's hand, even as she embraced her family. It would become the defining image of the wedding, of their family, of everything they represented. Epilogue. 5 years later. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. Edmund was 10 now, tall and athletic, captain of his elementary school soccer team, straight A student, completely normal except for the remarkable story of how he'd learned to walk. He came home from school waving an envelope. "Mama, there's a letter for you, from someone named Beatrice." Margot took it carefully. She and Lucienne had maintained occasional correspondence with Beatrice over the years, brief, formal, mostly updates on her progress and their lives. This letter was different. "Dear Margot, I'm being released next month after serving 6 years. My sentence was reduced for good behavior and for the work I've been doing here. I'm terrified. For 6 years I've been in a controlled environment. I've had therapy, structure, accountability. I've learned to face what I did and why I did it. I've learned to sit with guilt instead of running from it. But now I'm being released into a world that moved on without me. A world where I have no place, no purpose, nothing to offer. I don't expect your help. I don't deserve it. But I wanted you to know that the program I started here teaching financial literacy to inmates is continuing. They've asked me to consult on expanding it to other facilities. I said yes. It's not redemption. I know that. You can't redeem killing 2 people and trying to kill a child. But it's something. It's a way to use the skills I developed through evil means for something that might help people. I also wanted you to know I've been sober for 6 years. From alcohol, from the sleeping pills I used to take, from all of it. Clarity is painful, but it's real. If Edmund ever wants to know what happened when he's old enough to understand, tell him this. His aunt was a woman who loved badly and hated deeply and nearly destroyed everyone around her because she couldn't accept that she wasn't entitled to what she wanted. But watching him walk even in the news footage from your wedding taught her that change is possible if you're willing to do the work. I'm doing the work now. I don't know if it's enough, but it's what I have." With respect and remorse, Beatrice Margot finished reading and handed the letter to Lucienne. "What do you think?" "I think people are complicated," Lucienne said. "I think she did terrible things, and I think she's trying to be better. Both things can be true." Edmund looked between them. "Is this the lady who pushed me in the pool?" They'd told him the truth when he turned 8. Not all of it, he didn't need to know about the murders yet, but enough that he understood. "Yes," Margot said. "The same one." Edmund thought about this. "Is she still mean?" "I don't know, but she's trying not to be." "Then I hope it works. Trying is important." Out of the mouths of children. That evening Margot sat down to write a response. "Dear Beatrice, thank you for your letter, for your honesty, for your continued work on becoming better. I won't lie and say I've forgotten what you did. I carry Edmund's terror that night. I carry the 3 days I spent in jail for your crime. I carry all of it. But I also carry the understanding that you were a person in pain who hurt people because you didn't know any other way to cope. You're being released. That terrifies you. It should. The world is different now. Harder in some ways, more demanding of accountability. But here's what I know. You taught yourself financial management over a century. You can teach yourself how to live differently in 6 months. If you want help, real help, not charity, call the number at the bottom of this letter. It's for a foundation Lucian and I started. We help people with criminal records find legitimate work. We can't promise you comfort, but we can promise you a chance. What you do with that chance is up to you. Edmund is thriving. He plays soccer. He reads at a 9th grade level. He asks questions about philosophy and justice and why people do bad things. One day when he's older, I'll give him your letters. I'll let him decide if he wants to respond. That's his choice, not mine. But I want you to know, his recovery, his joy isn't about you. It's about him. About his strength. About refusing to let what happened define what's possible. You tried to break him. He became stronger instead. That's not your victory, but it can be your lesson. Respectfully, Margot Ravenscroft. She sealed the letter and set it aside for morning. Lucienne found her on the terrace looking at the garden where Edmund had taken his first steps a decade ago. "What are you thinking about?" "About broken things," Margot said, "and how sometimes they heal crooked, and how that's okay, because straight isn't always the same as strong." Lucienne wrapped his arms around her from behind. "You're thinking about those gloves again, aren't you?" She laughed. "Always." They were framed now, hung in Edmund's room. The yellow rubber faded slightly but still visible. Still a reminder of where they'd started. $2 gloves that had been worth more than $800,000 of equipment. Simple faith that had overcome complex doubt. A woman who had been nobody in the eyes of society, but everything to a family that needed her. "I love you," Lucienne said. "For 790 years I waited for someone like you without knowing what I was waiting for. And then you showed up and changed everything." Edmund called from inside. "Mama, Daddy, can we watch the wedding video? I want to see the part where I walk." They went inside together, a family assembled from broken pieces, held together not by blood or obligation but by choice. The choice to believe in healing, the choice to offer second chances, the choice to measure worth in determination rather than gold. And as they sat on the couch, Edmund between them, watching a younger version of himself walk down that aisle, Margot thought about the letter she'd just written. About Beatrice trying to build a new life from the ruins of her old one. About redemption being a process, not a destination. About how the greatest strength wasn't in never falling down, it was in getting back up, and then helping others do the same. The video reached the moment where Edmund completed his walk, where he threw his arms around his parents and declared his victory. Edmund, 10 years old now, whispered along with his younger self, and he had, they all had, one impossible miraculous step at a time. The end. Sometimes the most valuable things in life cost $2. Sometimes the weakest-looking person is the strongest one in the room. Sometimes the child who can't walk teaches the immortal being how to stand. And sometimes, just sometimes, simple faith is worth more than a kingdom. Because in the end, what matters isn't how long you live. It's how courageously you choose to love.